Screwed News. This is the last week of negotiations of Greek debt talks before the June 30th deadline. If Greece cannot pay back 1.6 billion euros to the IMF by June 30th, the country will default on its loans. But it can't repay that debt unless the IMF and the European Union unlock another $7.2 billion for the Greek recovery, money that is held up in negotiations. And those negotiations are plagued by uncertainty. Uncertainty whether Greece and its creditors will come to a deal, uncertainty as to what concessions the populist Syriza government is willing to make, and what the IMF will be willing to accept. And what frightens investors around the world, uncertainty as to what will happen to Greek and international financial markets if Greece does default and withdraw from the euro. The IMF has already forced Greece to cut away at many of its public programs and to privatize state assets over the course of several rounds of austerity reforms, resulting in a long-standing Great Depression in Greece. Greece elected the left-wing anti-austerity Syriza government in January, causing the negotiations to stall. On Monday, Greek negotiators presented a plan that includes higher taxes and welfare charges and steps to discourage early retirement without the explicit pension and wage cuts that the lenders are requesting. The Eurozone and the IMF negotiators seemed hopeful at the proposal, but the negotiations are far from finished. Here now to discuss the Greek debt negotiations and what might happen in the next week is Richard Wolff, economist, professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. Welcome, Dr. Wolff. Welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you. Can you walk us through the Greece's proposal yesterday and why its lenders aren't satisfied with it?
Well, the background to this is mostly what would have to be called public relations or political theater. The Greeks have been suffering for 5 years under an austerity program worse than any imposed on any other European country. The entire 5 years of cutbacks, rising unemployment. The unemployment in Greece now is worse than it was in the United States in 1933, the depths of our depression. People are leaving Greece because there's no jobs in the future. Young people have an unemployment rate in excess of 1/2, and on and on and on and on. For those 5 years, the promise was this suffering would get you out of the economic crisis. Across the 5 years, the crisis got worse. The promised benefits never showed up. That's why the Greek people, in the end, in January of this year, said enough of politicians who are cooperating in this scandalous failure. We want fundamental change. That came as a surprise, because elsewhere in Europe, where austerity is also the program, where the governments everywhere have done, as they did in the United States, shift the costs and burdens of the economic crisis onto the mass of people by bailing out the banks, by boosting up the stock markets, by helping those who needed the help least, and helping those who had done the most to bring the crisis at the expense of everybody else. The frightening reality for Europe was that in Greece, at least, the people stood up and voted out the leadership that did that. And everything since then has been shaped about that. Let me explain. In Germany and France, the two most important economies in the unified Europe, they are also imposing austerity on their people. A disproportionate number of Germans have been converted from regular full-time jobs to extremely precarious part-time jobs. It is a scandal. They have shifted the balance of wealth and power from the mass of people to the top, just like we have in the United States. And they are frightened of their own people's reaction. They have to smash, this is the punchline, they have to smash what is being tried by the Syriza-led government in Greece, because they're really carrying through a struggle with their own people to try to convince them of the hopelessness and the danger of resisting what, in fact, the majority of working people in Europe, which is the majority, would like to resist. That's the real issue here. The rest is details of public relations, leaks, and posturing, which is why it goes on week after week after week.
Are the economic austerity measures that are being imposed on Greece as a precondition to further assistance for that country, not unlike the economic austerity we're seeing here in the United States from the sequester on. Does that make any sense, at least economically? I mean, we can agree that morally it stinks, but is it good economics?
No, it's not good economics. It hasn't been very good economics anywhere in Europe. Europe is in the worst economic crisis anyone foresaw. In fact, very few people foresaw it. I mean, it is grim what has happened in Europe across the board. This is 5 years of austerity, which has plunged Europe in a spectacular crisis, of which Greece is only the worst part. A rational society that was willing to face what was actually happening would be in a big debate across all of Europe, trying to figure out what terrible mistakes were made, who made them, and how you fix them. Instead, they focus on a very poor, tiny corner of the European continent, Greece, and carry out this psychodrama as if that were the problem. The equivalent in this country would be a national debate about the awful people in Rhode Island. That would be the comparable size matter here. This is a game, and the real issue is, can we put on the mass of people in Greece, in Germany, in Ireland, in Spain, can we put on them all the burdens of an capitalist economic system that crashed in 2008, that has not been able to get itself back on its feet while taking care of those at the top who need it at least? That's a heavy order of business because it's so outrageous, and that's why this kind of crazy political game keeps circulating.
Yeah. Here in the United States, we can look at austerity at the Paul Ryans of the world, the Republican Party in general, who want to cut back on Social Security, privatize Social Security, do away with Medicare, and all these kind of austerity things. And we can say to ourselves either they're following an ideology that they don't think that the federal government should have these. You should be doing welfare. It's not in the Constitution. Or we can look at Milton Friedman and the Chicago schoolboys, or Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, that Paul Ryan gives out to all his staff people, and we can say, okay, here's where these crazy ideas came from. Where did these crazy ideas come from in Europe?
In Europe, it is an old classic struggle. You kind of have the societies divided, sometimes quite 50-50-ish, France, for example, between the part of the population which is afraid of economic change, whether they're small business folks or professionals or even working people. They kind of figure the known problems we live with are less frightening than an unknown change, even if the idea of that change is attractive. They are, in the literal sense, conservative and cautious. The other half looks at their situation, sees the deterioration in their hopes and the hopes for their children, and is ready to make big changes and go with that. That's what you're seeing everywhere in Europe. It's been that way for 100 years. And I would caution everyone that there's that danger that that issue comes to the fore again. As the Greeks proposed those changes that you referred to at the beginning over this last weekend, they also indicated that the more they're pressured, the more they're going to tax rich people, which they did in those proposals, and business, which they did in those proposals. And that's sharpening that old European conflict between the conservative hold back and the radical, and those are big struggles in Europe. They've caused civil wars. They've brought fascism when the right wing won. Those issues are lurking right behind the surface, because the more the rich countries squeeze the little, the more the left-wingers who come to the fore in Spain, in Greece, and elsewhere are going to have no place else to go but to go after their wealthy and their rich, because that's the only way to honor their electoral promises, to not let austerity shift all those costs onto the mass of people. That is the political reality behind all the posturing.
Yeah. In the minute and a half or so we have left, the fast track just passed the Senate today, and I'm curious your thoughts on that and on the TPP.
Well, I think your panel before captured it pretty well. There are a bunch of corporations who see enormous advantages in getting this kind of a trade pact through, just like there were a bunch of corporations who wanted NAFTA to go through. They are aware that environmentalists and labor unions know that this is not for them, so they oppose it. And they know that there are a bunch of other corporations who are going to be hurt by this. The way this works is simple. If a big company wants Obama and the Congress to get them a good deal, they have to give something to the other countries involved in order to get the privilege they want. They give away the issues that are of concern to other American corporations who don't want to get that shaft and therefore line up also with skepticism. So the end result is a bunch of folks on the right who are going to get shafted one way or another, and a bunch of big corporations who want it. The big corporations have more money. That's why the votes were changed. When they lost a week and a half ago, they just went around, this is the way our Congress works, and gave little prizes to those people whose votes had to be changed. A bridge over here, a post office over there, a better nod from the president on something else that they wanted, and they sold out to give these corporations what they want. And then we'll spend the next 10 years discovering how all that plays out, just like we did with NAFTA. This is the best democracy money can buy, and the TPP and the forthcoming TTIP, which is the same thing with the Atlantic community as with the Pacific, will be another replay unless and until a mass movement begins in this country that finally says, like they did in Greece, no more.
Right, but that's going to have to happen at the ballot box, isn't it, in the elections? It's remarkable.
And it's going to have to happen in people's willingness to finally stand up, not be quiet sheep being pushed around and squeezed. That's what finally did it in Greece, and I see no reason that this can't happen elsewhere in Europe. In Spain, it's already underway, right. Nor is there any reason why it can't happen here.
Yeah. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.